was completely different. It was designed with no boundaries. And most important, again, they were really focused on the process to make fluid architecture happen. Fluid architecture doesn't need to be necessarily about curves, okay? There's also a fluid transition between spaces that it is fluid, but it's not necessarily a curvy architecture. So it was more like blending the programs, blending the spaces and blending circulation, and that's why the design became so fluid. Fingers crossed, maybe I can get it built one day.
Hey Mariana, glad to have you back on the channel. It's always a pleasure having you here.
Hi Rishabh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your followers, and yeah, let's get it started.
Alright, so today we are discussing fluidity in architecture. You also teach fluidity in architecture through your classes. And so, this is a topic that I really wanted to explore. And we'll be looking at various scales where you use it and exploring different aspects of it. Now, before I start the interview, I wanted to let you know that you can support Blessedarch via Patreon. For as little as $2, you can help me create better and better content and connect with industry professionals all over the world to bring you the best and the most innovative of all of architecture and design. So if you wish to support the channel, you can find the link in the description below. Now, let's start our interview. Before anything else, before we discuss deeper, I want to first ask about what made you turn towards fluidity. When were you first exposed to it?
So I had a pretty traditional school of architecture. So when I was a student, it was a very modernist school, very focused on the Le Corbusier, Team 8, and it kind of stopped there. And then we kind of evolved to Caesar, which is also pretty orthogonal. So that was a bit of my learning times in school. And you never really think about fluid architecture at all, because there's also not a lot of space for that. And most importantly, the constructions methods that they teach you are not really for fluid architecture, which has a completely different process, design process and construction process. So the construction process that you learn, it's very driven to orthogonal architecture. So it never crossed my mind. For me, it was kind of a taboo. It was not really it was a dangerous place to be and to play. So I did a lot of dynamic architecture still. I really believed in dynamism and energy in architecture and the way you travel spaces. So it was very rhythmic, but very broken, still very orthogonal and very broken. So you could implement this same feeling that you have in fluid architecture, the speed feeling, but in broken architecture, still orthogonal. So that's what I went when I was in school. And then when I joined the Design and Research Laboratory, the DRL at the AA, Architectural Association, it was completely different. It was designed with no boundaries. And most important, again, they were really focused on the process to make fluid architecture happen. And what kind of construction does it need? What kind of design process do you need to have? What are the real constraints? So you were not encouraged to do fluid architecture in its as a main goal, but because they were teaching you that it's possible, you kind of start getting interested in it. And you either have that drive or you don't. You don't need to force the drive for fluid architecture. I definitely had the drive, so I found the best place to be learning how to do it and for why I should do it.
By the way, a lot of people, in the recent time have sort of DM'd me and reached out to me saying that, after they saw our interview where you talked about DRL and life in London, that a lot of them then chose to, apply to DRL and take up masters there.
I know, we should get a commission.
DRL people, please reach out. So any projects, build projects that explore fluidity that you really like?
Fluid architecture doesn't need to be necessarily about curves, okay? There's also a fluid transition between spaces that it is fluid, but it's not necessarily a curvy architecture, and that's really important. I still prefer the curvy architecture for many reasons. We will explore this during the episode. But there are also very fluid ways to travel in space that are not necessarily curved. Anyway, I still prefer the curves. So I'm definitely going to say the first one that I experienced in full like the emotional ones. I was in Rome. I was traveling alone, and I went to Rome to look for something that I was reading on a book, Norbert Schulz. It was called The Genius of the Place. So I went there to understand the genius of the place, of Rome and the city. So I stayed there for 10 days. And then I decided to also visit the Maxi by Zaha. And it was not on the plan, on like the traditional plan, but of course I was going to visit. And that was definitely the most overwhelming, fluid space I've ever been. I've never been in anything like it. I remember it was so overwhelming, and I draw a lot, and I was like doing a lot of sketches, and I was sketching everything I could and every corner and everything, especially the junction of the spaces where you have circulation. It is like the photos don't make any justice. And the photos are pretty good. Like all the photos of Maxi are amazing. But what you feel inside when you are actually experiencing the place, it is, I think it's, so far, you cannot match that. I haven't been in a place that matches that. And then another one was when I was doing the aquatic center. I was also traveling alone in London for architecture, and I walked in the aquatic center. I think it was the first time that I kind of had a bit of tears. I felt like the eyes kind of like, and because you feel this wave of the ceiling, it's like being underwater. And the wave is really, again, it's very overwhelming, and it really kind of grabs you and keeps you like inside of a space. I don't know how to explain, but the aquatic center was also like emotional.
There are very few spaces that have had that effect on me where, you really take a pause.
It works really well when you're traveling alone. You kind of let yourself feel the space a little bit more, and you're also a bit more open to it, yeah.
All right. So, further, I wanted to explore, fluidity through some of your projects that you have made over time, and see, maybe talk about those processes a little bit, and see how you applied the concept of fluid architecture within those projects. So the very first one that I want to talk about is the Hyperloop project. So for those of you who do not know, we've done like a whole video on Hyperloop where the whole team was on that made that project, and we discussed various aspects of that project in detail. So do check that out if you've not as yet. But let's talk a little bit about how you applied the concept of fluid architecture within that design.
So the way Hyperloop came to us design-wise was a bit to conciliate the speed of the Hyperloop, so the transportation network and the pods. And so the speed concept with the way people were traveling the space, and conciliated with the context, which was in the desert of Nevada. So immediately when I thought about speeds and the way the program was kind of distributed, it was very hybridized, and they were pretty mixed and pretty like blended. So I thought, okay, I'm going to add the speed concept to the blending idea of program. And then for that reason, the project became extremely fluid. It was not that fluid in the beginning, actually. We were traveling the spaces in a kind of a tripod. And then when we decided to do 4 courtyards, it was pretty obvious that there was a very good reference for it, for looping and for speed, which was the highway clover in the USA or Japan or China. China has very interesting highway clovers. So I kind of took inspiration of that, and then I brought that to the speed concept of the Hyperloop. And that's why right now when you look at the Hyperloop, the campus, the project, you can see the clover, you can understand the speed that is related to the Hyperloop, and it has a little bit of the Nevada going on because it has these courtyards with the palm trees and the oases and the greens. So that was kind of the process behind. And definitely traveling and experiencing the place of the Hyperloop campus, it has to be a fluid traveling. It has to be a fluid journey. It cannot be a broken journey. So that was a bit of the concept behind the project.
So fluidity in that project was not just in the form, but the way that the whole project is sort of laid out itself, right?
Precisely. Right. Yeah. The point is to blend the program as much as you can without losing the privacy or the public spheres. So it was more like blending the programs, blending the spaces and blending circulation. And that's why the design became so fluid.
Yeah. And within that I think, a form that sort of loops within itself. You were also within those loops, then you took out those pockets where you wanted to give privacy, you could also give privacy, and it was still a never ending transportation thing happening around it.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So the second one that I wanted to explore is the concert hall, and the one where you collaborated with Chantal as well. So let's discuss a little bit about that hall and the concept of fluidity within it.
So again, another very fluid part of the concert hall is music, right? The way music travels in space and the way we perceive music and what kind of images your brain kind of gets whenever you're listening to music is a very fluid process as well. So when you mix music and architecture, I can only assume that will be something fluid. Again, doesn't need to be organic, doesn't need to be curvy, but it has to be a fluid space. I don't see why a concert hall should be a box. That really does not match with music, but that's also my personal opinion. But this came as a collaboration with Chantal. Chantal, she's a generative designer, artist. She does a lot of generative work in Houdini. And at the time, she was researching this idea of creating generative answer response in Houdini to music. So you would get a design outcome according to the different music that is playing. She was also playing with a lot of algorithms inside of music and design. So we decided, okay, let's mix this and let's put this in a place that I can design, right? I'm a traditional architect and designer. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get the nice place for you to display this. And that's when, okay, let's do a concert hall and get your generative artistic design output travel this space inside. So obviously this was also extremely a fluid play. It had to be a very fluid place to kind of embrace Chantal art as well. And since the beginning, I always wanted to model the shell. So a shell, not a shell as in mathematical and architectural sense, but the shell of like a seashell. And there are a lot of properties in this seashell that is actually looping slightly inside. And these properties are extremely good for the way music travels. There is a very big study on it, on the interior of the shell for music. I also recommend everyone to have a look at it. So I decided, okay, I'm going to conciliate these, the properties of the shell and the concert hall, since it really enhances music. I think I can design something like that with the mathematical principles. So that's when I decided to model the shell. It became a project that was modeled from the interior to the exterior. So I modeled the interior before I did the exterior, since the main goal was how to embrace the music and how to embrace the interior space of the concert hall. That's the most important part of the concert hall. So I started with interiors, and then I kind of replicate what you have inside of a seashell. Started doing the balconies, and it became a quite successful project. And as soon as I had Chantal's project inside, they were working super well together, and that's how the concert hall came together in the end.
I remember when I saw the first, and especially when you had created, you guys had created those reels where you'd put in music and you were sort of approaching the hall and sort of going inside. I had loved those.
And thank you. It was a lot of fun. I really liked the project. I mean, fingers crossed, maybe I can get it built one day. You never know.
That'd be amazing.
That would be amazing.
So now let's move on to our third project, which is, so now we're going from an architecture on a bigger scale to something smaller, which is a product scale. We're talking about the Royal Chess Set. So, you know, one thing is in architecture, of course, there's a lot more complexity that comes into the picture because you're playing with a lot more forces. On a product scale, I think designers are a little more free with how they want to explore their art within that product. So talk to me about the Royal Chess Set and how those fluid forms came within that project.
It's funny you're saying that, because I really think that we think fluidity has a lot of constraints in architecture because of fabrication method. And then when I designed this little design product, I understood that there is a lot of constraints for fluid product design in manufacturing, a lot of constraints. So we know that in architecture we have constraints because we are architects, but then product designers know that they have a lot of constraints because they are designers, so they know. So I started doing a bit of design product exactly because of that, because I thought there are less constraints and it's easier to grab this scale and to make this scale work than making a very big project built, which takes very long time. So I decided I'm going to do a bit of design product. I saw a chess set online and it was a mix between curves but still very orthogonal. And there was like this very big hype around this chess set at that time, like a year ago. And I honestly thought that it was not very good. It didn't look very cool. So I thought, I think I can do better than this. And that's why I started designing the chess set. And whatever, if it's better or not, it gave me like a very good time. I was modeling it during my holidays. And because they are so attached to your hand, these little chess pieces, I think that it was very important to have them as organic as you could, but obviously ergonomic in a way that they are meant for your hand to move them. So they will most likely be fluid and organic pieces. That was kind of my train of thought. And then I kind of took the personality of each little piece. So the personality of a queen, the personality of a king, and so on. And that's why I decided to do this design. So I thought maybe the queen will be a little bit more luxurious, the king a little bit less curvy, a little bit less complex because it's male, and then the pawns, and then so on. But it was a lot of fun. And then it came the time that I had to actually manufacture, and it's again, simplicity wins. Unfortunately, because we haven't developed the skills yet, we haven't developed the technique to embrace this complexity yet. You know what I mean? I think we will get there, but we are still very stuck to the basic, to the traditional 90 degrees kind of methods for construction in design product and in design of architecture.
So, I mean, what materials were you looking at when you were sort of manufacturing?
I was looking into brass, mainly brass, metal. I wanted this this feel of opaque and not so shiny kind of metal, and I wanted to be heavy. I wanted to be cold, so it was definitely something done in metal. I also look at porcelain because in Portugal it's very cheap, but it would have to be bespoke, like handmade, one by one, and that makes like the error increase by a lot, like per piece. Yeah. So I'm still looking into it. I think I have an idea, but when you want to do it in brass, it's so expensive.
True. These were the projects, that I wanted to discuss. Before we go for the day and before we end our discussion, I want to talk about the classes that are available on Futurely. Which is your Fluidity Masterclass. So talk to us about that and what do you exactly teach there?
After I did the RL, so when I finished the RL and then I started working at Zaha Hadid Architects, I understood that there was this very niche culture of fluid architecture that was going on in London, and now I know a couple of other places. So it became clear that this knowledge has to be spread, and I'm pretty convinced that it has to become mainstream to construct with fluid design in order to keep doing fluid design, you know what I mean? So it's mainstream to do the normal typical T kind of architecture, right? The one that we found out on Stone Age, like 2 million years ago. We started doing the T architecture, so the vertical horizontal kind of plan. So we developed the construction methods for that, and now we don't want to leave it because, of course, everyone knows how to use it. It has to be mainstream to build fluid architecture in order to have this as an aspiration for the future and have it accessible money-wise and have it accessible knowledge-wise and all that. So if we keep it as a niche, like a lot of institutions wanted, this will never happen. I don't think we will be doing any robot construction if this is a niche. I don't think we will be doing any fluid design if the knowledge is a niche. So I decided, okay, I think I should spread this as much as I can. At least the knowledge that I have, which is unfortunately just the design knowledge. I obviously have a grasp on construction for fluid architecture. we cannot do something that we don't know how to build, at least the basic principles. So I think I should teach the design part and how do you design the fluid architecture and what are the main principles behind that makes it buildable. So that's why I started teaching. I started teaching at the DRL. I was doing a lot of design for DRL, fluid design, but not just for fluidity. It was also for the way people perceive space and the way people travel inside the space. So that was a bit of the main goal. And then I started teaching design, fluid design outside. So live, streamed live, and for a bit wider community. Sometimes I get 180 students per week, and I'm just basically telling them, this is a software, this is how you design, this is what you have to keep in mind when you are designing it. Hopefully there is someone that will come and say, and this is how you get it built, right? Because it's super important. We have to know how the basics of how to get it built. And that's all related to pre-rationalization process or post-rationalization process. And this is like, it's clear. The process is a clear process. It's a simple process, but takes time and also takes money. So we really need someone to start making this more mainstream. And it's funny how people are so concerned that parametricism is getting mainstream and fluid architecture is getting mainstream. That's not an issue. We don't have a problem with that. Make it mainstream, because that's the only way we can actually get it built. And that's the only way we can actually get our constructor workers to feel as comfortable with fluid architecture as they feel with the typical Stone Age traditional architecture. So yeah, make it mainstream, spread your knowledge, read more, get more knowledge from everywhere, and make yourself comfortable with the fluid architecture, because I think there's a lot of plus on fluid architecture that there are not on the typical TE architecture. On comfort, even on sustainability, on the impact on the sustainable world. Organic architecture is a win, more than the other one. For very basic principles, when you have a surface that is doing 90 degrees with the other surface, let's say this is a facade of a tower. One face is completely north, so it's not getting any light, everything is cold. One surface is completely south, so it's getting total light, and this is the European way. It's getting complete light, so everything's getting super hot. Okay, it's this 8 or 80 condition when you're doing the TE architecture, like the orthogonal architecture. When you're doing it organic, you actually make all the face rotate, and there's no south or north. They are doing this balance between thermal stability inside. Okay, so there's a lot of gains on organic and fluid architecture that I think we haven't truly developed to a way that we understand this is a valid way to go. And this is probably the way to go, because there are no extreme conditions. There is not this and this, there's this. Okay, and there's also very important fundamentals behind fluid architecture, like you don't waste so much material. You understood minimal surface concept from Freyotto, and you understand that the smallest path between 3 points is not 2 lines, it's a curved line. Okay, and that makes this material a lot less than this material. Okay, the basic principles of minimal surfaces, minimal paths, minimal everything is a curved line. Okay, and I think this is still something that you learn on places like the DRL and not in big schools. Unfortunately, teachers don't have the knowledge and don't have the interest. So bottom line, I'm teaching the way you do fluid architecture. I use the main software that we use at the office, and Zaha Office, and the main software that I was doing on the DRL to design fluid architecture, which is Maya from Autodesk. Everyone who follows me knows this. It's me and Maya every day. This is the tool that I use every day at the office, and everyone who's doing high-end design uses at the office. So I'm doing Maya, which is the one that I'm the best at this point, and that's why I'm teaching it to the other students. And right now I'm running 3 classes. One that is beginners, one that is intermediate, one that is advanced. It's on the weekends, it's live, and it's recorded. So even if you cannot be live, you cannot attend it live, you'll get the recording and you practice on your own.
That's great. And to anybody who wants to check out these classes can also go to the description below and find the link there.
There's a lot of theory of fluid architecture. It's not just an aesthetic option. It is a very important and valid option for the future. And I think we just grasped the very superficial surface of fluid architecture and not the real deep Sweden. So if you're really interested in it, write a master about it. There are very important studies nowadays that relate the human comfort inside of an interior space, in a fluid space and in an orthogonal T space. And it's not the same. Okay, this 90 degrees, we made this up. It cannot be more artificial than it is. Nature was never 90 degrees.
True.
So why do you think our comfort comes from a 90-degree angle inside of a room? So there are a lot of studies on it. So if anyone is interested in listening or reading something deeper than this talk, just have a look at it. You have everything online.
I think a lot of people, just shy away from it a little bit because, again, as you said, construction techniques, over the years, we've perfected building the 90-degree angle, but maybe not curved as much. So I think a lot of people just shy away from it because there's not as much implementation within the field, of architecture. But again, I when you said, when there'll be much more widespread adoption, maybe in academic circles, it'll start trickling down into the field as well.
100%.
All right. So thank you so much for taking out the time and coming to the channel. It is always a pleasure having you here.
Thanks, Rishabh. Thank you, everyone, to your community that is growing so much. So I'm super happy to be here every time. And see you next time.
That was it for this week, you guys. I will see you guys very soon with more such content. Keep watching Blessedarch. Do like, share, subscribe to this channel. And I will see you guys next time. Alright, let's do it. And see you next time.
Bye-bye.